blood, sand, and spectacle. The untold truth of Rome's Colosseum, the smell hit you first, a nauseating cocktail of blood, sweat, wild animal musk, and 50,000 unwashed bodies packed into stone seats under the Mediterranean sun. But you didn't care. You were about to witness something that would be talked about in every tavern, bathhouse, and forum across Rome for weeks to come. You were at the Colosseum, and today, someone was going to die for your entertainment. But here's what your history teacher never told you. Almost everything you think you know about the Roman Colosseum is wrong. The business of blood. The Flavian Amphitheatre. What do we call the Colosseum? Wasn't just Rome's stadium. It was the empire's greatest propaganda machine. A massive stone middle finger to anyone who doubted Roman power. When Emperor Vespasian began construction in 72 AD, he built it directly on top of the hated Emperor Nero's private pleasure lake. The message was clear. Tyrants take from the people. Good emperors give back in blood. And blood was the currency that bought political loyalty. Organizing games wasn't a public service, it was a career investment. Ambitious politicians would bankrupt themselves staging increasingly elaborate spectacles, knowing that a memorable show could launch them from obscurity to console. One particularly desperate aristocrat, Marcus Scaurus, once imported 150 leopards for a single day of games. He won his election, but died broke. Worth it. Romans thought so. The financial machinery behind these games was staggering. A single day of average games might cost 30 to 50 times what a common laborer earned in a year. Premium gladiators could cost as much as a mansion. Exotic animals required international smuggling networks that stretched from the forests of Germania to the deserts of North Africa. The Colosseum was unjust entertainment. It was the center of an empire-wide economic ecosystem built entirely on orchestrated violence. The gladiator, slave, superstar, sex symbol. Here's the paradox that breaks modern brains. Gladiators were simultaneously the lowest of the low and the biggest celebrities in Rome. They were mostly slaves, prisoners of war, or condemned criminals, human property with less legal status than livestock. Yet their names were graffitied on walls across Pompeii like ancient rock stars. Women left their husbands for them. Vendors sold gladiator-shaped oil lamps and action figures. One inscription found in Pompeii gushes that the gladiator Salatus was the sigh of the girls. But the reality of gladiator life was far more complex than Hollywood's muscle-bound heroes suggest. Gladiators lived in barracks called ludi, essentially prisons with training facilities. They ate a high-carbohydrate diet of barley and beans, so much that they were mockingly called horderi, or barley men. This diet wasn't about health, it was strategic. The layer of fat it produced made for more dramatic, superficial wounds that would bleed spectacularly without immediately killing the fighter. Romans wanted a show, not a quick execution. Training was brutal and specialized. Gladiators were divided into types: the Murmillo, with his fish-crested helmet and large shield, the Riciarius with his net and trident, the Threx with his curved sword. Each type had strengths and weaknesses, creating strategic matchups that Romans would bet on obsessively. The best gladiators were tacticians and athletes who studied their opponents like modern fighters study film. They could read a crowd, play to the emperor's box, and turn a losing fight into a sympathy vote for mercy. The truth about thumbs down, that iconic image of the emperor giving a thumbs down to seal a gladiator's fate, probably backwards. Recent scholarship suggests that Paulus Versotha turned thumb might have actually meant mercy when pointed down. Sword down, sheath it, while an upturned or waving thumb signaled death. The truth is, we're not entirely sure. Roman writers were surprisingly vague about the exact gesture, perhaps because everyone at the time already knew. What we do know is that the emperor rarely decided alone. The crowd's roar mattered. A gladiator who fought bravely even in defeat could win Misio Hay Reprieve. The sponsor of the games, the editor had to balance the crowd's bloodlust against economic reality. Dead gladiators couldn't fight again, and replacing them was expensive. One economic analysis suggests that only about 10 to 20% of gladiatorial bouts ended in death, far lower than the 100% mortality rate popular culture assumes. But don't mistake this for mercy. When death came, it was ritualized and theatrical. The defeated gladiator would kneel, grasp the thigh of his conqueror, and wait for the blade. An attendant dressed as Charon, ferryman of the underworld, would ceremonially check the body with a hot iron poker. Another, dressed as Mercury, would guide the soul from the arena. Ebony Death's Romans demanded pageantry, beyond gladiators. The circus of horrors. If you think gladiator fights were the main event, think again. The full-day program de Munerawas, a carefully cut festival of violence that began at dawn and ended at dusk. Morning sessions featured the animal hunts that were less hunt and more mechanized slaughter. Imagine thousands of exotic animals released into an elaborately decorated arena, transformed into an artificial forest. Then imagine professional hunters, venatores, systematically killing them while the crowd munched on snacks. In one particularly excessive celebration, Emperor Titus slaughtered 9,000 animals over 100 days of games. Entire species were driven toward extinction to feed Roman appetites. North African elephants, Mesopotamian lions, Caspian tigers. The ecological devastation was empire-wide, but the worst came at noon, during the lunchtime lull when wealthy spectators went home to eat. This was when the Noxi, condemned criminals, were executed through damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. These weren't fights, they were public executions dressed as mythology. Criminals might be tied to stakes and torn apart by starved animals, or forced to reenact mythological deaths. One particularly twisted show had a criminal play Orpheus right, up until the bears refused to be charmed and ripped him to pieces. The crowd laughed. Even more disturbing were the Faudal Charities, where criminals reenacted mythological scenes that ended in real death. A prisoner might play Icarus, with actual wings attached before being dropped from a height. Another might play Hercules, burned alive in a tunic soaked in pitch. Roman writers described these with the same casual enthusiasm. Modern reviewers describe special effects. Engineering the impossible, the Colosseum itself was a marvel that would be matched in the West for over 1,000 years. Beneath the arena floor lay the Hypogeum, a two-level subterranean maze of tunnels, cells, and mechanical elevators. Trapdoors could launch animals or scenery into the arena through a system of 80 vertical shafts. Stagehands below worked winches and pulleys in sweltering darkness to create magical appearances that awed crowds above. The most ambitious spectacles flooded the arena floor for full-scale naval battles, reenacting famous conflicts. The engineering required to make the Colosseum watertight, fill it with enough water to float ships, stage a battle, then drain it for afternoon events in a single day was staggering. Some historians believe later emperors abandoned these water spectacles because the engineering was too complex and expensive even for Rome. The Colosseum could also be covered with a massive retractable awning called the Velarium, operated by sailors from the Roman Navy. This 240-foot wide fabric roof protected spectators from sun and rain, using a system of ropes, pulleys, and masts that required a permanent crew of 1,000 men. The luxury of watching people die in air-conditioned comfort. The end of games. So what ended these games? Even after Christianity became Rome's official religion in the 4th century, games continued for decades. The real killers were economics and changing warfare. As the empire weakened, the international networks that supplied exotic animals collapsed. Wars no longer produced floods of prisoners for the arena. The empire couldn't afford the games anymore. The last recorded gladiatorial bout occurred in 435 AD. Though beast hunts continued for another century. By then, the Colosseum was already fading, stripped of its precious materials, its purpose forgotten. Medieval Romans used it as a quarry, a fortress, and eventually a shrine. They had no idea their ancestors once filled it with water, then blood, then forgot why. The mirror we don't want to see today. We visit the Colosseum and feel safely superior to those barbaric Romans. But are we? We watch combat sports, where brain damage is part of the business model. We turn executions into political theater. We consume true crime documentaries about serial killers as entertainment. We might not feed people to lions, but we've perfected the art of profitable violence. The Romans would probably look at our society and feel right at home. They'd recognize the same human impulses dressed in different clothes, the same desire for spectacle, the same ability to rationalize cruelty, the same disconnect between those who watch and those who suffer. The Colosseum stands today as a monument to human ingenuity and human cruelty existing in the same space, built by the same hands, applauded by the same crowds. It's not a relic of a barbaric past. It's a mirror held up to civilization itself, reflecting back what we've always been. Brilliant, creative, cruel, and always ready to sell tickets to the show. The question isn't why Romans built the Colosseum. The question is, what are we building now that future generations will visit with the same horrified fascination?